Hello, and welcome back to the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. I'm Jennifer, and today Joey and I are going to go a little off script. I read an article in the New York Times that was very intriguing, and I asked Joey if he would also read this article for our discussion. The article was about a 92-year-old man from Ohio who had passed away, and the headline was something along the lines of 92-year-old man reads 3,599 books in his lifetime. That, of course, got my attention because we are readers. The article is very sweet and tender. He passed away. His daughter created a website to publicize her father's list. The library where he obtained many of his books later in life actually now gives that to their patrons. You can find out what Dan read. You can read Dan's book. So I thought that was just a very interesting concept. Joey, before I say anything more about my attachment to this article and the theories and the ideas behind it, I'm very curious to know, what was your experience as a younger person reading that article? As a person who is in a different phase of life than either Dan or myself, I'm very curious to know what your thoughts are on keeping a written or electronic copy of your lifetime book list.
Well, I don't have a lifetime book list, but I like the idea. I think it's cool to be able to look back at anybody's reading, but especially your own, and see how your tastes have changed. But it is interesting to have the opportunity to look at someone in your family's lifetime of reading and see what could have interested them the most and maybe made an impact on them in some way. I have a list of my own, but I don't have a list of books that anyone else in my family in different generations would have read. I have mentioned when we were first talking about this that my grandfather was a pen pal before him and my grandmother got together. During World War II, he was stationed in Hawaii, and he wrote her letters and quoted specific books. There was one called Strange Fruit by Gillian Smith, some Ernest Hemingway. Obviously, that seems like a choice. And there were some others. I can't remember all of them. So I have somewhat of a list, a very small list. But yeah, I think it's a good idea. It's interesting. I like that.
I am of two minds because I was looking back through my Goodreads history. The app obviously came online after I became an adult and established my reading habits. So I'm like, oh, I've read this, I've read that, check, 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 to all these boxes. I have this huge total, at least in my mind. And I made a new rule for myself today in thinking about this conversation. I am no longer going to count any book that I have read that I cannot recall reading. And as you know, with my stellar memory, I've read approximately 12 books in my lifetime. I have no idea how that's going to work out. But what I really appreciated about this article, it does bring up a lot of questions. Last night, I was with a group of people that I've known for the last 2 decades who are all very avid readers, asking them about their habits. Do they keep lists? Do they think it's a good idea? What would people think about them as people when you look at their library selections? And that was just a very nice conversational thread. The person who I am closest to in that group said he doesn't keep a physical list in that way, but he went through his bookshelves and he was revisiting some of his old classics that he really liked. And he was like, some of these just didn't make the grade. He thought this was a great experiment for him, but he was like, I don't have time to reread some of these old books. I looked around my library in my office and I realized I have so many books that have made the trip to Michigan. So I am now missing my books that need to make the trip back. I am currently juggling 3 different locations for books, and I cannot wait to have all of my books back home with me. As you may guess, Joey, it's very difficult for me to jettison books out into the world. Once a book is mine, I think it will always be mine. How about you? Do you feel comfortable passing books on when you are finished with them?
Yeah, I give away books all the time, especially when I worked around people, because I work remotely and I have for quite a few years now. I would just bring in all the books that I didn't want anymore. And I was like, you guys want these? I'd be like, oh, you know what? I know you. And I think you'll really like this one. I didn't like it, but I think you might like it. So I have no problem giving away books. If I really like it, I will lend it to someone and then tell them, don't mess this book up. Unless if it's like a really old copy that I just got for like $1 or something at a used bookstore, then it's probably not a big deal. But if it's a really nice copy, I'm like, you can borrow it, but it's coming back to me and it better come back in the condition.
Rules.
Yeah. So don't do that
Rules.
to me. I think that because Goodreads and apps like that, like Storygraph, which we're on, and I'm personally on, because these are all very popular things for readers now, every reader will basically have a list like this from now on. So it's interesting that this is something that was so treasured, and it should be, by his family. Dan from Ohio. It's a very nice thing, but it is something that has become so ubiquitous now because we can, follow certain people. You can follow us on Storygraph and see, oh, what is their star rating? Did they leave a review? What did they say about it? So you can, you stay up to date with that now.
Well, that is very interesting, Joey, because I have a friend whose mom kept a Excel spreadsheet of all the books that she had read. It was hundreds and hundreds of books. She really liked romances and mysteries and perhaps not the literary fiction things that we have focused on. It was interesting for me because I'm like, are you doing that because you want to remember the books and you don't want to accidentally reread one of these books that you've already read? Still attracted to this cover, but I'm still probably not enjoying the reading. I can imagine in myself it will ignite this feeling of competition, of scorekeeping. And it's like that for me personally is not what reading's about. What did you take away from each of the books that you read? That new understanding of myself. I also love pen and paper. I know it's not very searchable, but it is a thing. I would like to look at the books that are on my shelves, which are all right here, which I know we can't see, and hold the book in my hand and say, do you recall this? And if you do not recall this book, maybe it's time to read it again. And if it's not time to read it again, maybe it's time to let it go. And Joey, I think I am very much the opposite of you when it comes to that, is that I'm attached to my books for very sentimental reasons. I was just talking to my best friend before I jumped on this call, and I was like, yes, The Snakehead, the reason that is a book I'll never get rid of is that that's the book where we reconnected as friends. That was where our social circles reconnected and kickstarted our connection. And I am so sentimental. I don't remember what the book was about, but I do remember it brought my friend back to me. I have been the proud recipient, Joey, of books from generous people like you at work who's like, I finished this book. I think you're going to love it. Do I give it back to you? No. They are not holder honors of books. They are jettisons. They take this book. I don't have any room on my bookshelf. It's got to go.
Yeah, you don't have to be like that if you don't want to. I don't always give away books unless I was just like, I will literally never reread this, so just don't bring it back. I don't want to see this again. But I think it's nice to be able to share those things. I don't really feel very sentimental over books unless I really liked it and I got like a really nice edition. These cloth-bound Penguin classics look really nice, but I don't really have a sentimentality about each of those books. Something in that article that I feel like was saying was his reason for reading that much. It does sound like a lot. 4,000 books sounds like a lot over a lifetime for sure. But what is the math on this? Like 60 books a year or something like that. Which to a lot of people, yes, that sounds like a lot of books. That is not a lot of books to me. I read much more than that in a year. So it's interesting too that there's this desire for people, if they're on like Book Talk or BookTube or something like that, a lot of these readers read a crazy amount of books. Some people are reading like 300 books a year, if not more sometimes. I like the extreme. So I was just saying, these people are going to be reading a lot more than that.
Joey, I am curious about that because when I was talking to my friend in preparation for this, he also did the quick math in his head and said, well, that's a lot of books. He is a slow reader and it takes him time to get through his books. But the point that you made, at least for me, if I read 300 books in a year, I couldn't keep any of them straight. I'm very much a reader who is episodic. I will read the book. I will be in it. I can recite chapter and verse. I know exactly what we're talking about. And then the next week you're like, remember, we just read this book? I'm like, doesn't sound familiar. Well, you might want to go listen to the podcast because you had some interesting things to say about it, Jennifer. And I don't know why you don't remember the book. I just think it's so interesting. We often talk about what's the quote unquote right way to read a book. Whatever way brings you happiness and makes you want to do more of it, that's the right way. So if people are really getting charged and energized and their brain is just getting packed with all these great ideas and literature and plot lines by reading 300 books a year, bravo. That's fantastic. At this phase in my life, I want to really focus on savoring great literature, great by my own standard, not by anyone else's grading mechanism, that makes me feel something. What gets lodged in my memory as a result of reading this book, that is something that I definitely would like to take away from that article. I have a theory about Dan Peltzer. I think that was the way his last name was pronounced. He had a very strong Jesuit background. He was in the seminary before he decided to stop doing that and have a family. There's a very strong reading tradition in a lot of religious practices. So I think he did that as a comfort, as a curiosity, as a habit. And I think he just got into the lifetime habit of reading as an integral part of who he was. It was very interesting for his daughter, who is in her 50s, saying, I remember talking throughout my lifetime with my dad about various books that we enjoyed. They didn't read them necessarily at the same time, but they had that common language. Joy, what are your thoughts on that? Have you had conversations with people in unusual circumstances or across age demographics based on the books that you're reading?
That's as simple as the stuff that I read is not something that typically the people in my social circles are also reading. Usually my brother-in-law, I can guess what he would like that I have already read. So I'd be like, Brian, here, you're going to like it, I bet. So he ends up reading some of the same books that I read, but we don't really talk about it. Sometimes it's a small conversation, but not like a huge conversation. But other than that, not really.
Okay, Joy, I had a much different answer in mind for you. And as we often say, I can't decide for you what your experience of reading is. But what I was thinking you were going to say is during the pandemic, Jennifer, I joined a lot of online book clubs. And I specifically went to book clubs and read things and talked to people all over the world about literature.
I didn't join book clubs until that year that we met, so 2023. So yeah, I had never been in one prior to that. I did read a lot during the pandemic, and that's when I discovered I wanted to study English literature. But yeah, I didn't talk to anybody about it. I was just like, these are great. And I was reading 20 books or more a month because I wasn't doing anything else. Unexpected answers, I guess, for me. You would think a different, but no, I did not do that.
Joey, what I love about being wrong, because I'm often wrong in our conversations, and that is a really fun place to be, is that the assumptions we make about people, even people we think we know pretty well, we know each other in a very bookish literary context. That is the circle of influence that we have over each other. That I got that wrong. The story I told myself about this life you were having did not reflect your own. And so that leads to the other question that we were playing with. If someone were to look at your book collection, what would they think? Who was this person? What assumptions would they make about it? And I will say my mom passed away in 2018. So when I went home to help my dad clear out my mom's hoard of just amazing books. The house could not contain another morsel of books. We needed to manage them. I don't remember my mom reading a lot. She had a lot of hobbies, but I don't remember her reading a lot. But when I looked at her books, they were about interpersonal relationships. They were biographies of people that she really admired. They were about homemaking and gardening and antique barns and architecture. And I was like, that's my mom. The things that she loved and was passionate about as a person, she amassed all of these books because that was something she just loved, flipping through the pages and seeing what was there. And I think that was really very interesting. So I was looking at the books that I have in my house, and there's a lot of different stuff going on here. They're definitely not grouped thematically. Here is a story about Polynesian explorers. Here is a self-help book. Here is a human sexuality textbook from college. There's a huge range of topics that if you were to say what kind of person was Jennifer, I'm not certain you'd get a completely clear picture of me because there are some, I'll just call them wild card books there that might be a surprise to people 20 years from now when they're going through my books. How about you, Joey?
What do I think people would think about my collection? I don't know. I'm always looking at my books and shopping in my own house, which I absolutely love because I have almost 1,000 books in a very small apartment. So like, why am I doing that to myself? I have so many bookshelves. It's like, come on. I was looking through them because I've been in a straight up literary fiction mood. I don't want any little elements of magical realism, even though sometimes it has snuck in recently. I wasn't expecting that, but all right. I have a lot of genre fiction, and I think that's because as I was starting my collection and getting back into reading as an adult, which was in 2020, I was watching a lot of booktubers and discovering that stuff. So I was reading a lot of classics like Frankenstein up here. You can't really see it, but that's all of Jane Austen's completed novels, and then there's some Bronte sisters over here, and then Dostoevsky over here. I was reading a lot of classic literature. I read Pride and Prejudice for the first time in 2020. But anyway, this is not the question that you're asking me. I think people would think it's kind of eclectic because, like I said, I have a lot of these serious novels that are classics like Ulysses and William Faulkner. I have a few of his. Then I have these over here, which are high fantasy, and they're obviously very large books. And then, you can't see the rest, but there is a lot of high fantasy. Yeah, it's a lot of high fantasy actually on the shelf. And then I have manga over here. Probably people would be like, wow, he's interested in a lot of different things and a lot of different topics and different types of literature, I would assume.
One of the things that I am really excited about is that I see a book on your shelf that matches a book that I have on my shelf. And so it's always a curiosity for me. Obviously, we are doing this podcast together. We have some shared overlap in our previous reading lives that it shouldn't be that big of a shock that we are able to find books that are on both of our shelves
We
randomly.
both own Frankenstein, is that what you're saying?
Frankenstein, and I think you have Girl, Woman, Other. Which
Oh, I do.
think
It's
can
not over
read
here
from
though. This is all Jemison. This is super high fantasy stuff. But yeah, I do have that book. I do have some Bernardine Evaristo books over there because I do like her.
So, Joey, when you were thinking about the books that you have read, are there any from, we'll say, 10 years ago in your 20s? Any books that you're like, oh, those were my favorite books. I loved them so much that now you're like, do you have
I can't really say from 10 years ago. I can only really start at 5 years ago because that's when I really started reading. I mean, I read as a child and I liked reading. I wouldn't say I was like a bookish kid, but I did read probably more than my peers. I don't remember really anyone reading outside of school. But if we start at 2020, when I was actually actively reading as an adult, in my late 20s, yeah, not over here.
So, Joey, when you were thinking about the books that you have read, are there any from, we'll say, 10 years ago in your 20s? Any books that you're like, oh, those were my favorite books. I loved them so much that now you're like, eh. Do you have
I can't really say from 10 years ago. I can only really start at 5 years ago because that's when I really started reading. I mean, I read as a child and I liked reading. I wouldn't say I was like a bookish kid, but I did read probably more than my peers. I don't remember really anyone reading outside of school. But if we start at 2020, when I was actually actively reading as an adult who is in his 20s, right? I was 20. I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were hanging on to the tail end of those 20s.
Yeah, I was in my late 20s. What was your question? What were my books that I really liked? Okay.
The nature of the question is, in looking at and thinking back to 2020, everyone is in lockdown. We're all reading anything we can get our hands on because, as you said, what else are we going to do? Can you think back to that time and see a change in the types of things that you're reading or the way in which you're reading or your enjoyment of reading? Has that changed over a half a decade, right? We're 5 years in.
Yeah.
How does it feel?
Wow, that went fast. I actually bought a lot of books. A lot of my collection started in 2020 because Barnes & Noble, you could just pick it up. They would like leave it outside the store and then you just went and got it. So I was constantly at Barnes & Noble. So I can tell you what I consider to be my favorites at that point because I made a list of what books I used to like or I really thought were my favorites and what are my favorites now.
Oh, great. I would love to hear that, Joey. So what were some
old as in 5
previous
years ago.
favorites?
So The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, which a lot of people consider that their favorite book for a good reason. He won a Nobel Prize for literature. Obviously, he's still writing. So that's a great one. I haven't read it since then, but I remember it being really great. Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark, which we have both read now. That was my reread. It holds up. Good for Mr. Clark there. The Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. Again, we just read that. I think that holds up. Two books that are not so literary. Gil's All-Fright Diner, instead of All Night Diner, by an author named A. Lee Martinez, who I don't think is writing anymore, but he's still alive. He's young. And I've read every single book that he's ever written, and there's quite a few. So obviously I'm a fan. And then a book called The Graveyard Shift. It's a part of a collection called 24/7 Demon Mart. This guy works at a convenience store, the Graveyard Shift, obviously, and the beer cooler, the fridge, It's a portal.
Beer cave.
Yeah,
is
the
what we
beer
call
cave.
it.
Yes, that's it. Because the author is from the Midwest, so there's a lot of Midwest flavor in there. I'm not from the Midwest, obviously. So that's the portal to hell, and it's really funny and it's a good time. But anyway, those are my favorites that I could remember from 2020. A little bit of a mix of genre and literary fiction. Do you remember your favorites from whenever? Doesn't have to be 5 years ago. It could be older.
Well, Joey, it's very funny that you say that because I was looking through my bookshelves, which is why I remembered that a bunch of my books are in Michigan waiting for me to come rescue them and bring them back home. They need to come home for me. I need to be able to touch these books. I pulled out a book, and I have it here, actually.
Oh, Their
and
Eyes
it's
Were...
Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I read this originally in college. In the early 90s, I had taken a African American literature class, and for me that was quite a stretch because that was out of my cultural norm back then as a rural kid who did not have a lot of diversity in my community of birth. I just remember being blown away by this whole world of culture that I had no idea about. I think you have read this book recently, and it is very provocative. It is very beautiful. It is lush. There's so much
So
going on in
sad.
that book, and there's some sadness. And it was just a nice reminder of the worlds that can be opened up through books that may not be accessible in my day-to-day life, right? I didn't move to a large city. I didn't have a diversity of acquaintances until much later in my life. But that sort of set the stage of thinking, yeah, there's a lot of other voices out there that are worth me hearing that if I wasn't accessing through books, I probably wouldn't have had those interactions. So that was something that I really appreciated. And it has stood the test of time. I was also thinking I moved to the Philadelphia area around 2001. What were the books that I can remember coming here with and thinking this was great? One of the books that I remember so distinctly is called Ahab's Wife, or The Stargazer. It has 2 titles, and it was by Sina Jeter Nosland. That came out in 1999, and I remember hearing a book review of it driving home, listening to NPR talking about books. And what I loved so much, and this still today rings my bell anytime I have a chance to do this, it's historical literary fiction because she took the viewpoint of Moby Dick's main character, Captain Ahab, and she assigned him a wife. Literally, there's maybe one line in Moby Dick that talks about Ahab getting a wife, and Sarah Nesland decided that she wanted to create a whole backstory. She wanted to know who this character was. So she invented this beautiful, very intricate, emotional, the story stands alone completely 100%. If you knew nothing about Captain Ahab or Moby Dick, it's still a great book. But as we read through Moby Dick, those characters were referenced, and it kind of gave you a different flavor of her life, both before and after her marriage to Captain Ahab. So I just love that. That's a book that will definitely stand out in my memory as one that I got when I was here. So interesting that my other book was called The Time Traveler's Wife. So we've got 2 wives going on here. So apparently at that point in my life, I was very focused on matrimony. That has passed, thankfully, for everyone involved. That has passed. I remember reading The Time Traveler's Wife and being really consumed in it. I love the story. And the thing that I remember most about that book and why this stuck with me, there were two elements. One, a young girl, her partner, through time and space, he just keeps popping into her life. And she loved him because he literally showed up in her backyard. First guy she ever met, like, boom, okay, I guess you're my husband. That's great. That appeals to the romantic side of me. And he loved her because she told him to. She's like, you're going to love me and we're going to be together. And he's like, okay. And so I just thought that was such an interesting concept that he needed to be told that he was going to love her forever. And she loved him forever just because he was the first man who crossed the threshold. And I just thought that was super interesting. The second interesting thing for me about that book is I was in a discussion with a bunch of other people and I was like, you know what? I don't like science fiction. Science fiction's not for me. And she's like, did you just read the book that we've talked about for the last 2 hours? I'm like, well, that's not science fiction. She's like, time travel? what do you think of this? I'm like, well, there were no lasers, there were no Martians. That can't be science fiction. And she's like, I think you might need to broaden your perspective of what science fiction means, Joey. And I can laugh about that now, but for me, it was really a revelation moment of like, I love that. I love time travel. I don't think that's has anything to do with science fiction. That doesn't sound right. And I was like, well, what about Margaret Atwood? And it's like, yes, Jennifer, there are also these speculative elements to her writing that is not science fiction, but it does stretch the imagination.
The Orcs and Crake trilogy, that's definitely science fiction.
Yeah, so I can say that it was nice to have someone else, after I'd already loved some books, to kind of open that definition up for me, because I had a very narrow view. It's like Star Wars, Star Trek, that's science fiction. These are real books, in my opinion. And I'm so glad that that has changed.
Now you're a science fiction fan.
Some.
Yeah, that's okay. There's like subgenres to all of these genres. I didn't like it, but if you like time travel, Blake Crouch, and I think it's called Recursion, a lot of people like that. I did not like it because I don't really like time travel. It's a paradox. I can't unsee it. If you go back in time, then you would never have had to gone back in time. So then you would not go back in time. And it's a cyclical argument, and it's stupid. Okay, not to yuck your yum. All right. You're saying Zora Neale Hurston and Their Eyes Were Watching God. Excellent book. Obviously, there is so much scholarship around that. Devastatingly sad, extremely well written. It's a classic for a reason. It's going to remain that way. But are there any other ones that you're now like, my reading tastes have changed when you moved to Philly, that you're like, this has changed? Is there science fiction in there? You still like The Year of the Flood, and that's science fiction.
I love The Year of the Flood, and I was trying to think, like, what books, if for some unforeseeable reason I am told I have to get rid of all of my books except 25, which books would make the cut? And I would, because I always have to not follow the rules, I'm like, well, fine, I'll just put them all on my Kindle, and I will still have 500 books, but they will all be on my Kindle. All of my Margaret Atwood books, I would have to really pick and choose if there are any that I would be willing to give up. One of the books from the early 2000s is a play. It's Racine's version of Phaedra that I remember reading and then going to see a live broadcast of it through one of our local art theaters here and getting goosebumps watching Helen Mirren. And I still, to this day, that was one of the most visceral, full body theater experiences I've ever had in my life. So I'm never going to get rid of that copy of the play that takes me back to that moment. Hey, Joey, I know that we have talked about this in the past as I was recounting books that I can actually remember reading when I was in Hawaii before 2002. This book is called If I'd Killed Him When I Met Him. The author's name is Sharon McCrum. I remember devouring this book and loving it. And looking back, my question to myself is, what was so appealing about this book? It's a love story. It's a mystery story. It has some historical fiction. It's a whodunit. A woman kills her husband, which I'm always down for. That's something that appeals to my reading
Killing
taste,
husbands.
apparently. Yes. I just ordered a copy because I think my other copy is elsewhere. It's not a very big book. As you can see, it's not very big.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see if reading it now, if the same elements will appeal to me or not. But as we have talked, my memory is not always crystal clear. But what I do remember in this book is that she poisoned or didn't poison her husband by putting powdered sugar and arsenic on one of his beignets. We were recently in New Orleans eating beignets, and I was like, yes, treat or murder weapon, you decide. And it was just a really fun memory to think back of an experience that first came into my life because of this book. So we'll see, Joey. I'm really curious if I'm going to be like, well, that was a waste of 3 hours, or if I'm going to be like, yeah, it's like a cozy sweater. You just kind of snuggle back into it like, oh, I remember you. Because there are definitely books like that for me. Do you have some cozy books like that?
I don't typically reread many books. It's very rare that I will reread something, but I will tell you what my new favorite books are. Guess what? It got very pretentious in the 5 years. So it's about to get It's about to get pretentious, and I cannot help it. My reading tastes have changed. Okay, first up, and I will say this one is definitely cozy feeling to me. Okay, is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Not the one that most people love the most. Usually it's Pride and Prejudice, but I love Sense and Sensibility. I think it's her best one. I will take no notes on that one. I've heard people say it's overrated and just it's not as good. I'm like, no, this one's the best one in my opinion. I do love Pride and Prejudice, but Sense and Sensibility is number one for me, and I've read that a few times now. Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Yes, these both are sounding very pretentious, but Dostoevsky, and especially Crime and Punishment, that one I bring up a lot because it's so influential on so many different authors and so many different books and different literary devices are being used and philosophy and stuff. There is so much in that book. It's like 100 pages or so.
And Joey, it's a classic for a reason. I am not surprised that you are bringing up books that are 100, 200 years old. This is literary fiction. This is what I'm here for.
Yeah, you can't beat these already. And then Beloved by Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison, obviously, come on. We bring her up because she's an important author, not just in the American canon, but in the literary canon globally as well. She's a very important author. If someone has not read her but likes literature, you should definitely do it.
Forever and all time, Joey. Forever and all time.
Definitely a well-studied author forever because her books are fantastic. Beloved, I really like Jazz a lot too. I read Paradise, which is the third of this trilogy that she did, which I don't know why they're a trilogy because they're not connected, at least that I could find. But whatever, I'm not a genius like Toni Morrison was. Paradise was my least favorite. I still appreciate it for what it was. It's a huge undertaking. It's not a huge book, but there's a lot in it. It's all about a town. But Jazz is also really good, but Beloved will stay my favorite. I could be basic for that pick. I don't care. The Craft of Verse by Jorge Luis Borges. Now, this is nonfiction, so a little bit different because obviously we've only been talking about fiction. We typically only talk about fiction, fictitious stories, although this is an article, so Borges never wrote a novel. He only wrote short stories and essays. These were lectures that were recorded, whatever. But it's fantastic. It's pretty short, and it really taught me a lot about not just reading poetry, because obviously it's the craft of verse, but reading in general, but definitely poetry. I've talked about it and quoted it a lot because it's so important. Then my last pick, because for whatever reason, I only want to ever pick 5 things, but it's really hard because I have an honorable mention after this. But I'll say To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, because that is the book that made me go, oh, I see now. I see why she is so amazing. Maybe I was not so well versed in literature yet. Modernism is hard to read, so I'm not the only one who felt like that. But To the Lighthouse is excellent story. It's so subtle. It's so sort of quiet, and I don't want to say mundane because it's like their average life, but it's beautifully done, obviously. If you like descriptions of nature, Virginia Woolf, few can do better than that. But my honorable mention, and it's only honorable because I just read it recently, it's called Mayflies by Andrew O'Hagan. He's Scottish, and it takes place in Scotland. And it's so beautiful. I mean, heartbreaking. Really hysterically crying as if I lost someone. It's so beautifully done. I think you would actually like it, half of it. Maybe not the sad part. It takes place in 2 timelines, in 1985 and 2017. So the first half of the book is all about music and the punk scene 1985, which I don't know if you liked that stuff.
I am aware of that stuff, Joey. I was a teenager in 1984, but I was not a punk rock teenager. I was more a Madonna, Whitney Houston kind of girl at that
well,
time.
you would probably get more of the references because there's a lot of reference that are very specific to 1985 in that era. So you'd probably be like, oh yeah, I recognize these things without having to look them up. Where I was like, some of these I knew about, like the big band, but some of the little references, I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Then 2017, when they're all older, obviously, over 30 years later, one of the characters is diagnosed with terminal cancer, and it's his journey of deciding to go to Switzerland to end his life. And tragic. Oh my God. But it explores so many things. The author creates a sense of nostalgia in me, in the reader, in my reading experience, where you're like, oh, you get it. Like, I get it. Now I'm nostalgic for 1985 because I want to remember the time when these characters were healthy and young and ready to like take on life and are not nearing the ends of their life, or in this one character's life. No spoilers. I won't give away who it is, but It's beautifully done, and it's just like just one of those books where you're like, how the hell did you do that? With words on a page, you made me nostalgic for something that I was not around for. That is impressive.
That
And
time.
about fictional lives, people who never lived. And I'm like, oh my God, I miss it when they were interacting with their family and stuff like that. And it's so beautifully done. I think it's going to be a favorite of all time. Eventually, you know, you need to give it some time, let it breathe, see if if you still remember it. But he came out with a newer book recently, I think. So I'm definitely going to keep reading more of his work, but highly suggest it.
I love that, Joey. So just give me 1 minute because I have something I need to show you. So maybe part of our rating system can be how much of this box of Kleenex am I going to need to read your particular favorites? Because all of the things you talked about are touchstones in my life for the time periods. I think he and I are contemporaries, possibly if he's writing about these specific time frames. Obviously, he could be older or younger, having a vivid imagination, but I really appreciate that. And Joey, as I was looking through the books, I realized I have a lot of books about writing, about exploring in Antarctica. I have many books that I have gone to book readings or book signings of local authors. So there's a wide plethora of topics. I saw you. You touched this book, and that meant something to me. And I also realized I have a ton of books in comparison to the wide variety of things that are here about humor. So apparently I needed some humor in my life. So these are not my top 5 best books today or yesterday or tomorrow, but I just thought they were really funny. So I'm going to bring them up because I just find them extremely funny. So Joey, this one is called The Pun Also Rises, and it is about a Midwestern guy from Michigan. I read the first couple of paragraphs of this and I'm like, I want to marry this man. This is my guy. I've moved on from that topic, but he gets all of the puns. He is the corniest cornball person. He goes to a pun competition and wins it. And I was like, you can have competitive punning like this. Where are my people? How did I not know this? And then I recently got a book called Broadly Speaking, and it says 100 years of wisecracks, insights, retorts, and wisdom from the women of comedy. So there are so many gems from Mae West and Lucille Ball. These are so good. And because I just can't get enough. My father was a great comedic presence. He could always tell a joke, and he was like, daughter, just don't even try, because I would always get the punchlines wrong. I did not have the right timing. It was terrible. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to show you, Dad. I'm going to get this book of jokes. And so randomly, when my dad was ill, I would open one up and I would like read it to him. And I could get a chuckle out of him. I'm like, okay, all I need is a prop, because apparently when I bring my own jokes, somehow they don't land because my memory is so faulty. I'm like, you know, the one about the rabbit. And he's like, that's not a joke, daughter. That's not the joke. I'm like, wait, my final thing I'm going to say on this whole thing, while I was going through my stack of books, I found a book that is gift wrapped from a local bookstore, and I don't know what it is. So I would like to just open this book, because maybe this is going to be my new favorite book.
Book
I
haul,
don't know.
y'all. Yeah, maybe
I have
that
no
is.
idea.
Okay.
Why
Does it have a
this
description?
exists.
Is it like a blind date with a book? Like it says something about the book? No?
It's just nothing, and I'm not sure how it came to me. I'm very confused. I know where it came from physically, but I'm like, did I order this? Was this a gift? Did one of my girlfriends give it to me? I do not know. Or it could be a random blind date, as you said,
The
because
Boy
this
in
one
the
is
Lake.
called The Boy in the Lake by Adam Pelsman. So I don't know anything about this book other than it feels nice. And this one is called The Papaya King, also by Adam Pelsman. So apparently it was a 2-for-1 special of this author. And beautiful cover. I do like it. It goes with my ambiance here. So thank you so much. Judging books by covers. They're relatively short. We can see they're not giant books. I would love to see if this will be a new author that I can get excited about. It was also just a curiosity of how these books came to be. I don't know. So, Joey, did you find any surprises on your bookshelves that you're like, how did this get here?
There was just one book that I was like, where did this come from? I don't remember buying this, but I'm glad I bought it. I don't remember what it was, though. I don't remember.
Well, if you're anything like me, you'll have that same reaction the next time you see that book and like, where did this book come from? Joey, thank you so much for going off script today, doing something a little different. As you said, we don't normally discuss novels because it takes a long time to read and we do a lot of talking and a lot of meeting. But I would like to challenge ourselves to perhaps do the thing that I miss most about my old book group. We had a great guy who would every spring pick two books, sometimes a nonfiction, sometimes two novels, and pair them. And one of the pairings that you would appreciate was The Hours by Michael Cunningham and Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. So reading those two in concert really did enhance my reading experience of both of them. And so I would love to have some suggestions from our listeners if they have books that they think just naturally dovetail together and would be a great pairing. I'd love to hear about those.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that. Two novels that are similar in theme or something is similar about them.
Or it could be a novel plus a nonfiction because we also read The Swerve, How the World Became Modern by Stephen Greenblatt, which is about this quest to retrieve Lucretius's poem on the nature of things. And we also read On the Nature of Things. It's an interesting pairing to have a nonfiction book paired with a fiction book or two fiction books. We've done two nonfiction books back to back because I think I need some more creativity and some more adventurous literary themes than just reality. I'm kind of done with reality right now, Joey.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to think about that and see what books I think would be. It's kind of hard sometimes when you haven't read them before and then you're like, I'm not really sure what is in it yet. So I can't tell.
And I will say, my friend who did the picking, he unfortunately is no longer with us. His legacy to me was that he read a ton of books. He was always, always reading. So he would read some books, set them aside, had amazing recall. He's like, the book that would be great to read with this. And so he just had a long list of pairings. And year after year, for probably 10, 15 years, we read two of his books that he had picked. And he never got it wrong. I'm really missing that tradition. Others have picked up the mantle. It's been a little hit or miss for my taste, but they are still doing those pairings together.